My name is Sasha, and I'm an Azure MVP, Azure Security MVP, and Microsoft Certified Trainer and Regional Lead, as well as EC Council instructor, and focusing on Azure and security, but been in IT land since Windows NT version 3. And feel free, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Today webinar is somewhat lightweight. We don't have too much to go through, and we have a bonus as well if we about Azure policy if we will have time. And first of all, this webinar we will talk here about role-based access control, which is one of the basics, basic features, basic things. How can we control access to Azure resources in our Azure infrastructure? So what it is actually, role-based access control is, like the name says, like the name implies, it is the access control based on roles, and it also provides a very fine-grained access management to Azure resources. So this role-based access control means that based on the role that we have determined, then we have a possibility to actually control which individuals, and not just individuals, but which accounts can have what kind of different kind of access to the specific resource. So there we have a few concepts and that we'll mention. So in order to provide fine-grained access management of resource to Azure, in Azure, it is built on top of the Azure Resource Manager. Like it's been everything built pretty much that deals with Azure resources. So it is used to segregate duties within your team or within your individuals, within your accounts. And the point is that we also here adhere to the basic principle, which is one of the basic principles of latest zero trust control. Just one moving part and one of the crucial parts of controlling access to Azure and the resources is the principle of least control. So the point is that we have to grant only the amount of access to users that they need to perform their jobs. So any inadequate permissions would lead to potential security breaches, security flaws, and increasing the security footprint. So out of the box, we have different roles definitions. We will say what these role definitions are shortly. And if that doesn't suit us, then we have the possibility to actually tailor these roles and actions and scopes and assignments to our purposes. So, for example, if out of the box if the role that is built into Azure doesn't follow our organizational structure and role assignments, then we can easily do that, tailor that to our needs. So there are a few concepts in here. Security principle, which is the object that represents something that is requesting access to resources. So, for example, this can be a user or a group or service principle or managed identity. So that's the object actually that is representing something that we need to access. Then there is the role definition. Role definition is definition of it's a collection of roles collection of permissions that actually lists all the operations that can be performed on that security principal. So, for example, that could be contributor, owner, reader, user access, administrator, and so on. So there are many built-in role definitions. And how can we build role definition? We'll see that in short. But then we also have a scope. So we've tackled the security principle. We defined the role definition. Then we have the scope as well. So the scope is also important. So the scope is actually a boundary, a limit for the level of access that is requested. So we can limit the level of access that is requested to a certain boundary, and that can be one resource or one resource group, or a subscription, or a few resource groups, etc., etc. And then we have the assignments, and the assignment is actually attachment, assigning, the process of assigning or attaching a role to a security principal for at the particular scope or at the particular level. So, for example, reader level at the subscription, or administrator at the resource group level. So, for example, this could be one of the examples of the assignment. So, attaching a role definition to a security principal at the particular scope. So users can grant access described in role definition by creating an assignment. So the assignment, we'll see that there are already mentioned in the portal. There is also mentioning of the deny assignments, but these are currently read-only. It can be only set by Azure. So deny assignments actually currently we're not able to assign a deny assignments, but in fact only allow assignments. So you might ask the question, how can we actually deny something? But we can do that, but by not assigning an allow assignment. So to a role, to a security principal. So these by using role-based access control, actually we can define, divide or segregate duties within the users, and then we can then grant only the amount of access to users that they actually need to perform the jobs. So too much is not good because they might do something that is out of their scope of work, and or do harm. And too little is not good as well, because they might be hindered to do their work efficiently. So tailoring, well, first of all, knowing users' scopes and assignments, and a definition of work, actually what the user actually needs to do, what the user is allowed to do, and knowing in detail how that user actually, what the user actually does in an organization, and what are his or her responsibilities and duties. It makes a lot easier to define the role-based access control, or assignment, or role definition. So if we create a definition that is, for example, contributor to some resource, or a writer, then we know that the certain person can only, the job of the person is only to update the list, but not manage and delete the list, or storage accounts, and so on. So knowing work scope of the person, of the user, is of the paramount before actually defining the role definitions. And instead of giving everybody unrestricted permissions, and imagine that exists even today. And this is this kind of behavior is really contagious. And then this has roots from a server. From server level, from server history in on-premises. So in the past, I've seen too much organizations and companies actually started to give the local administrator privileges than to give the domain admin or enterprise admin even to a lot of users, or not using that these access control lists, like they're called in on-premises environment. And administrators, for because of the burden that they have, usually that's the reason they just want to offload their work duties and just give the non-appropriate permissions to everyone. So that usually carried to the Azure as well, to the cloud, and then actually that's of course that's not good, because if we don't limit what users can do then or see, then we are in deep trouble. Probably not immediately, but if something bad happens, actually this is what will actually save us from the inevitable potential more problems. So instead of giving everybody actually unrestricted permissions in the Azure subscription or resource, then we can allow only certain access, for example, at a particular scope. And then so that's the point when we plan for access control strategy. It's very useful to actually, it's best practice to grant users the principle, to grant users the least privilege, or adhere to the principle of least privilege to get their work successfully done. So we also have some role definitions here. So we will define what actually role definitions are. So there is a list on the documentation side for every resource provider. But what is actually a resource provider? Let me see that for a moment, and to look for a appropriate picture that I want to show you. So the resource provider, Azure provider. I'm looking for provider for a picture. Where it is, images here. Azure resource provider. Oh yes. Let me see if, oh, there it is. This is the picture I was looking for. Come on, click. That usually works. There it is. Open image in new tab. Excellent. So, oh, it's too small. Let me see if this one is good. It's a little bit better. Or even this one. Oh yes, that's bigger. So the resource provider actually, okay, there we are. So we have here the resource manager. That is the Azure resource manager. So let's make a snip of that. Did that work? No. So, oh yes, it worked. Come on. So the Azure resource provider here is the actual resource provider yeah, that's it. So that's the resource manager, or Azure resource manager. So these are resource providers there. point of contacts to the resources in the Azure data center. So there is a resource provider actually that deals with issuing commands to the virtual machines, for example, or to the network, or storage, or databases, and so on and so on. So Azure Resource Manager is, you see, like an intermediary that issues commands to these resource providers, and these resource providers actually have their own actions that they can do. Actually, they have the commands that Azure Resource Manager can issue to them. So we are using these commands and to define the role definition in this case. So we can see that no matter how actually we issue commands, whether it's in the Azure portal, like in here, or whether it's in command line, or whether it's in the Visual Studio, all the commands actually get translated and then to the Azure Resource Manager common language, let's say, and then the Azure Resource Manager contacts and issues commands to the resource to the specific resource provider. So in this case, we need to have that in our role definition, which is actually a collection of permission that lists the operations that can be performed on the resource provider. So, for example, delete, write, and so on are the commands that are here defined. So each role actually is a set of properties defined in the JSON file. That role actually contains the name, ID, description, and also the permissions or actions that actually that are allowed on the specific resource provider, or denied permissions. These are the not actions. And the also assignable scope, or the scopes, and the scope, for example, like read, write, access, and so on. So then we have these are the we can have either built-in, which are out of the box role definitions, or custom that we made. So in either case, these contain the same. So like we mentioned, we will mention also a little bit more of these actions, not actions, and etc. etc. You can you notice probably that there is also, for example, like a common asterisk that actually means all, for example. So for the resource for that resource provider, it will allow all actions delete on every action in the authorization scope, and so on. So let's go a little bit further. So we have actions and not actions. We've defined that as well. Actions and not actions here are actually these properties here can be tailored to grant and deny the permissions that we actually need. So built-in role can be, for example, have the owner role that can have all the actions, or the reader role can only have read actions, and so on. Defining the actions and not action actually is not enough to completely implement the role, but actually we need to also scope the role. So the scope is defined into the assignable scopes here, and it actually specifies the scope, or scopes of to which applies these permissions, and that can be either subscriptions, resource groups, or any kind of resource, for example, or resources, and within which the custom role actually is available for for assignment. And then we can define the either one or more, or 2 or 3 in this case. So in this example, process of binding a role definition to a user and to a group or a service principal at a scope for the purpose of granting access is actually a role assignment. So first of all, we have a service principal. So this can be user, group, managed identity, or some, let's say, user. Then we have the role definition that we've defined in the previous step. Let's say we have a set of definitions in here that define, let's say, owner, contributor, reader, and so on in the second step. And then we have the role assignment. So that role assignment, let's say contributor, is then assigned to the either marketing group, for example, to the resource group, pharma sales in this example. So only marketing group will only have access to the pharma sales research group and not to the others, because they have absolutely no right to be there or do anything to actually stay on the safe side. So they probably won't have any interest, let's say, in going inside, but you don't want to actually leave anything to chance, and then we have to be actually very well aware what we do and adhere to the principle of least privilege. So the role assignment is actually, like I said, the process of attaching role to a user group and or service principal, or for example a managed identity in this case. And in this case, for example, if the scope is, let's say in this case, like resource group, then the role assignments are inheritable. So the inheritance goes from the top to the bottom. So there is actually, in this example, you notice that we don't need to grant access to the entire subscription. So roles we can actually just assign the role to a specific group, or as well as at the individual resources. So in Azure role-based access control, the resource actually inherits the role assignments from its parents. So if we assign a role assignment to a resource group, then all the resources actually inherit these. And so, for example, if a user group or service is granted access to only a resource group within a subscription, actually they will be able to access only that resource group and the resources within it, and not the others. And what else? We do have also the Azure AD roles, and sometimes these Azure AD roles, let's say, pose some confusion within the users, because there are Azure RBAC roles, there are Azure AD roles, and what are these, and what is the actual the difference in that. So Azure role-based access control actually manage access to Azure resources, while Azure AD roles actually manage access to Azure AD objects. And while the role-based access control is scoped and can be scoped at multiple levels, Azure AD roles actually are scoped exclusively at the tenant level. So and that's the biggest distinction, but you'll see on the practical example as well as the role information for the RBAC roles can be accessed in Azure portal or command line interface, PowerShell, etc. And even AD roles as well, but of course with Microsoft Graph as well too. These are the primary differences. So management for the Azure resources, and management of the Azure AD objects. And here is the scope, the tenant level, and the scope can be specified at multiple levels. So, but you'll see how these look like actually, and you will actually see the difference between two, and you can actually tell immediately what it is. So so why actually more of these, and why actually have why don't we just have one and instead of two? Why these are not incorporated in one? Because of the history, actually, it drags from the past. So when initially access to resources was managed by 3 admin roles. I've been in Azure, into Azure since the beginning, since it was called Red Dog, and at 10 years ago we had a Azure Service Manager portal, and back in the days we had account administrator, service administrator, and co-administrator, and that was it. So back in the days, that it was practically impossible to actually granularly define the roles. So later, a few years later, well, Microsoft have noticed already immediately that this architectural is not good and won't scale enough, and won't be good in the future. So they immediately started to build Azure Resource Manager, and now we have exclusively Azure Resource Manager portal and our role-based access control. So later, the RBAC, or role-based access control for Azure resources, was added, and actually the new RBAC authorization system is actually introduced, that is allowing us to fine-gray access management to the resources in here. And it can, well, it includes many roles, of course, but the main possibility is actually that we now have not just 3, but many users, many roles, many definitions, and of course because of the of that, we also have many to manage resources in Azure AD, such as users, groups, and domains. We also have the possibility to do that, as well as define multiple administrator roles. And this is actually the a high-level overview of the RBAC administrator roles and Azure AD administrator roles. How are they related, actually? And Azure RBAC is actually an authorization system that's built on ARM, or Azure Resource Manager. And these are the here in RBAC we have 4 fundamental roles, which are the owner and contributor, user, and user access admin, and reader. Reader, like name implies, it can only view Azure resources. Contributor can access and manage and all types of Azure. So contributor and owner is practically similar. It's not the same, but it's similar. And the difference is that the owner has full access and can grant access to others, while contributor can create and manage all types of other resources, but it can grant access to the others. So there cannot be some issues with that by giving the contributor role, and then that the contributor gives to another person the contributor role. So that's not possible. And then there is also user access administrator that can actually only manage access to Azure resources and nothing else. Then there we have Azure AD admin rules, which is the global admin, application admin, and so on, billing admin, which has different scopes towards the Azure Active Directory tenant objects, but not on the but not on the Azure objects in the subscription, actually, like virtual machines and storage and so on. These are the actually administrative roles that I use to manage just Azure AD resources. For example, like create, edit users, or assign administrative roles, or for example, reset passwords, assign licenses, and manage domains, and etc. That's the point of these. And here, like I said, we have different ones like global admin, user admin, billing admin, and etc. etc. We have many of these. We will see that as well later. And then there we have also this is practically a similar picture. So when to manage actually by default the global admin and doesn't have access to all Azure resources, the global admin actually for Active Directory can temporarily elevate its permissions to the Azure role-based access control, a role of user access admin, and actually that action practically grants the permissions, RBAC permissions that are needed to manage Azure resources. So, and then the user access admin is practically assigned at the scope of the root. So, as a global admin, then you might need when to elevate your permissions. So, for example, to regain lost access to an Azure subscription or management group, or let's say to view all subscriptions and management groups in an organization, or grant another user or yourself access to subscription or management group, etc., etc. And there, like we mentioned before, there are some Azure basic Azure role-based access control, with which I mentioned before, owner, contributor, reader, user access, administrator. So owner has full access and can delegate access. Contributor cannot grant access to others, and readers is practically just reader, and user admin manages these resources. So how can we build our custom roles practically? And this is just one example of a custom role. So first, we previously, a few months ago, and even before that, a year ago, something like that, we didn't have the graphical interface. We didn't have the possibility to define roles in the portal. So we had to write our own JSON file and describe and define our custom roles in here. So the name implies, actually, the name says that defines the custom role. Then description adds the description, and then we define the story. Then we define the action on the specific specific resource provider. Resource provider in this case is, let's say, in this case is Microsoft Storage. Then we have resource provider. You'll see the different ones. Network, we see the resource provider compute, we see the resource provider authorization, and insight, support, and so on and so on. So all these are different resource provider. So for example, Microsoft.Network resource provider provides access to all of the network related things like networks, subnets, IPs, and so on. Compute gives you the possibility to access virtual machine scale set, virtual machines, etc., etc. Storage, all kind of storage, and you get it. This is the what it is. So beyond that, it means when we add, for example, asterisk, like in this case, it means that this action will apply, and that role will apply to all subsections of that specific resource provider. So for Microsoft Storage, we will be able to actually read all things related to anything that manages, that Microsoft Storage resource provider manages, any kind of blob or any kind of storage that is under its control, as well as network compute, etc., etc. Then there is the, in this case, assignable scopes that actually define the scope. We can, like you see, we can add multiple things in here. So assignable scopes here defines the different subscriptions, whereas /subscription and then the subscription ID and the different providers, for example, or different resource group or resources. So this is just one example of Azure custom role. Then there are Azure custom role properties. So these are the properties that we've seen before. Not actions, data actions, not data actions, assignable scopes, and description, name, ID as well, etc. So we had to define, and some of these are required. So name, role name, and ID are required, as well as role type and description. So all these are required, like display name of the custom role, unique ID of the role, and whether it's custom or not, and the description, which is good to have, and then the action that is applicable, array of strings that specify the management operations, read, delete, restart, etc., or not actions. The array of strings that specify the management operations that are excluded actually from the allowed actions. So instead of defining like 20 allowed actions, we can put an asterisk on actions and then just exclude one or two, whichever is required to be excluded, as well as data and not data actions, as well as assignable scopes. Assignable scopes can be either subscription level, or resource provider, or resource group, or a specific resource. So, for example, let's see that in few examples. So, for example, role is collection actions, and here is the applicable PowerShell command, which actually get the role definition of the owner, let's say, and see all the scopes. We see that all actions are defined here for the owner. And for the contributor, then there is also it lets manage everything except access to resources. So we see that contributor has Microsoft authorization resource provider excluded. So it can do everything to everywhere, but actually, and to all the scopes. But actually, it can delete, write, or elevate access action. It can write or delete roles. So the contributor cannot add anything, cannot elevate another contributor or another administrator in this case. And the reader as well can do everything and read scope everywhere, of course, but only actions that are allowed are actually to read. An asterisk means everything, for example, in this case. So let's say if we have VM contributor, then we have a different set of actions defined, for example, like authorization that we need to read, then availability set, locations, VMs, etc., etc. A lot of these are granted to be able to actually contribute as a VM contributor to the virtual machines, but not to the others as well. So we just see the specific actions here available. So how to actually define a custom role? A very high level overview to actually well, a good practice. How can we do that? So we either do that via the PowerShell or CLI or any mean REST API, whatever, or even Portal is even better. We'll see how it works in a moment. So first of all, decide how you want to create a role, and then you need to determine the permissions that you actually need. So when you create a custom role, you need mod operations that are available to define your permissions. So First of all, the permissions, determining the permissions you need actually consists of two things. So determining what permissions are there available for the specific resource provider. So if it's a virtual machine or storage, then let's see what all the permissions can a person have to and do on that resource. That's the first thing, or 2.1. And 2.2 is let's see, our storage, let's say, administrator role in organization. What are his duties or responsibilities? So the storage administrator can manage or read logs and write things in there, but cannot actually delete the storage itself, which is actually tailored to the company administrator and et cetera, et cetera. So that's actually very important to determine what actually person is doing and or needs to do. So the principle of least privilege, and then assign the scopes based on what we have defined here in what based on what the actions have. Based on what the actions are available, then assign the appropriate permissions to the person. Then create a custom role. So the best thing is to start with the existing built-in role actually. That's the best, and then just change it and modify it for your needs. So the easiest way today, of course, fortunately, we'll be praising these for many years, and it's really easier to do that using Portal. But anyway, if you want to do that really fast, of course, since all the role definitions are in fact JSON files, so these are pure textual files, you can just send them to somewhere to someone in an email, or post it somewhere, or share it, and then the user just fires up the PowerShell command, and that's it. And then I suggest that you test the role, just apply to a specific person. Usually IT persons are good for that, and just to test it and to verify just that it works as you expect. And if you need to make adjustments, and you can later just update the custom role. But let's go and just see the actual roles here. So let's go and take a look. So for example, if I let's go to there are virtual machines. So if I wanted to create a custom role, if I want to create a custom role or see the role defined for this virtual machine, let's say this is the SRV3 VM, then we have, well, this is kind of fun, isn't it? So we are talking ages about role-based access control, while this says access control IAM. Well, yeah, okay, they should have just put the RBAC or whatever, so it would be probably easier to find it. But anyway, once we know where it is, we just know that this is it, in fact it. So access control IAM. So identity access management. So once we click here, then we can see we can check access. We can verify the access of a current user. We can these are the shortcuts here. We can view the design, but just view deny assignments. We can we cannot add actually add these. We can view access to this resource or grant access to this resource. So whatever we do here, we are dealing with the access on this resource level, so on the SRV3 virtual machine. So for example, we can check access to any user group or service principal, or type in or check for the name. Let's say user 1, and click on this one and actually see what it has. So zero assignments for the SRv3 for the user 1, for example. We can see that different role assignments, and which is very good. We can also download the role assignments here, and we can see the different roles available. And of course, we can see the deny assignments, but this one works. So we can, if we click add, we can add role assignment or add code administrator, but we can only see the deny assignments. And this is for the backward compatibility, which is the classic administrators in here. So let's go quickly here and see the this is rather new. Number of role assignments for this subscription is 2,000 and maximum. We have 13 now, and we have different roles. So we can see what type is it, whether it's built-in or it's a custom role. We have a little information circle that actually says a little bit about what it is. This is in fact the information found in the description part of the JSON file of the role definition. So it's important that you actually, when you define roles, that you describe actually, first of all, that you name the role, user-defined role, in a way that it will be immediately obvious what this role does. For example, like here, user access administrator. And if you need a little bit more explanation, then you can, of course, go in here and hover on the top of this and get a description on what it does. So it lets you manage user access to Azure resources. So this is the description field. So it's really important that you do this right. So first of all, do correct, a non-ambiguous a role-based custom role naming, because it's important, because users can, if the name is ambiguous, then administrators will well, inadvertently add this role assignment to a wrong person, or a right person will get the wrong assignment. So that's the thing, definitely. And the description should be actually also non-ambiguous, clear, concise, what actually it does. Then we have the type, of course, and the number of users and groups or service principals that actually have that kind of have that role. We can actually, for example, if it's contributor, then or reader, let's say, we can see if we click in here. Let's just go in here. For example, if it's let's say reader, we have or any log analytics, let's say contributor, we can then click in here, clone it, and then edit it. So we can actually don't start from the scratch, let's say, or see the permissions that this log analytics contributor have. So although this permissions is still in preview and might change how it looks, I'd suggest that you also go online onto the documentation site, where we actually have a little bit, well, much more better visibility on of how these role-based access controls look like, of what they are consisted of, and so on. So, for example, we can see that in Azure there are a lot of Azure resource providers. So, for example, we need to find log analytics in here. It's somewhere in there, and where it is, I can't find it. So anyway, let's go log analytics. Maybe it's on the L. Is it? No. Monitor, and but well, nevertheless, none. Let me see if oh, there it is, partial. But anyway, let's go just in one and see what it has. So, for example, Microsoft, under the resource type Microsoft, there is the SaaS resources, which this log analytics role contributor has read access. If we go back and if we go, for example, on Microsoft.compute or let's say any storage. So this is the partial. I guess it's a little bit lagging. Then Microsoft Compute has availability sets, cloud service resource, disk access, disks, galleries, etc., etc. And then we have here read, write, delete other actions that are defined for these permissions. So how can we actually add our own easy? Before we had to use the PowerShell and the JSON file, but nevertheless, it's depending on what you do, either one can be very useful or easy. So let's go and click Add Role Assignment in here, and we can either start from scratch, for example. Well, actually, let me see the. Okay, let me add the role assignment to a person. Then we can actually click here, then select members 1, 2, 3, or 4. Let's say and user 4, and then select role. We've selected, let's say, a reader, and then assign access to, for example, we can actually also use the system assign managed identity to assign a specific role to these managed identities as well. So now we have role reader and selected members, and then there's save. So if we click save, then we can see the actual users that are being added to the different roles. So we can see that this SRV3 has 2 readers and 2 reader roles, and these are their roles actually. So if you want, we can also download role assignments in a CSV or a JSON format, and then use it actually to describe or define our own roles as well. Then let's go to the, for example, if we go to the subscription level in here. So let's go and pick one. Let's say it's the demo subscription. It's really lagging these days, this Azure portal. So let's go click on demos, and this access control here tab exists as well. So as well, it exists here. So once we do that in here, it will actually create or give access on the subscription level, and everything that we do here, it will be propagated to the research group level and to the research group. But here also a very specific thing that we hadn't had before on the resource level, and which is the add custom role. So you have to be at the subscription level actually to do that. So add custom role adds a custom role, which is a wizard driven, so very nice and very easy. So we can create a role, give it the custom name. So let's say test one is pretty ambiguous, contrary to what I said, but anyway, it's just a test. So let's test a contributor, and description, it's just a test. So baseline permissions could be either we can clone a role, we can use the JSON if we have one that we used before and add it. So we actually might export the existing one and change it and use it here and change it afterwards and so on. So it's a pretty nice nice wizard and nice way how can we define role. But we will here clone a role, and specifically a contributor role. So to clone the role and then to click next, we need permissions. Since we cloned the role, we actually already have some permissions that we added. So resource provider authorization has all delete and all write authorization to it, and so on. And then we can also exclude some of these, and if we don't want, if we for example want to change something, so let's just include something. And it's really slow, so I might already skip that because it's lagging for some reason. Okay, anyway, there it is. So we can search for permission. Let's say restart, just for the sake of doing it. Restart VM. I had that in mind. So restart. And you can see that it's pretty good, because it's when you type in restart, and then as you type, it filters out, and then there are actually all the resource provider under which the word restart and whatever you type actually exists. So you can easily filter out what it is, and much easier than going through the documentation side. And restart virtual machine. So I just exclude this one, and then click OK. So this is the actually restart action, is actually not action here. And then next, then we have the assignable scopes. The assignable scopes is this subscription actually, but we can add here, remove this one and add the other one. So we can remove the subscription and let's say put this instead, and add and remove that one. And then with next, this will just apply to the web. And then we can do what? We can edit it here. So we actually see that this is pretty much pretty useful. So we can download it, copy it, and in the next step, we just see the end results, an overview, and click on create. Then we have a test one contributor that we successfully created. And we can then actually use that in the role assignment. So that should be roles that should be already here. So it's supposed to be like slow like that because there's a huge data center behind it. And sometimes it's not about the internet connection, because it's really good. This page isn't responding. Yeah, I know. I'll wait a few seconds more. And there it is. So let's see, the test is here. It should be under T. And there it is, ST. Where it is it? I don't see that one. No. Anyway, well, we did create it, so it's somewhere here. Probably it's not refreshed. It's really slow, so it's slow in refreshing that as well. So I probably need to push here. Let's just. Oh well, these days refresh is really sensitive in command in here, which might crash the browser, like it crashed a few times this morning, but I hope it won't. Let's just give it a few seconds more. And one of the reasons, now I remember that it might be also because I have a lot of windows open here. So let's just go to the T. No, oh, there's no. Well, nevertheless, it's here. Sometimes it has to be also refreshed. Refreshed by pressing F5 or just closing the window and then open it again. So in this case, we see the built-in roles here and the ones that we've made, and also we've mentioned also the Azure AD roles. So we will just skip on these and well, actually just look at on these as well. Let's go on home and go to the Active Directory, and we will then be able to see the roles and administrators, and these are actually Active Directory roles. So you'll see that these roles and administrators differ. We can also create a new custom role for these as well, and it's actually we can actually start from scratch or clone. We cannot actually use any JSON file in here, but anyway, these are administrative roles for the that control access to Azure AD. So both these can be built in or custom. So we see that we can set it up as well, and also see the all the roles and their descriptions and the applicable actions that these have.